Hi, Mr. Burrell. Okay, so I really enjoyed class this year, and I really enjoyed having History of China with you, and I really learned a lot, and even though I know I didn't really talk too much in class, I really did learn a lot, and I really did think a lot of it was very interesting. Like, I remember the first day of class that I had joined, which was one you were talking about, I saw the isolation of China for years and years. I thought that was really interesting because now China is like a big giant country, and it's just like it's just doing so well compared to the West, and it's just kind of like the East kicking like the West and like totally destroying them, because after years of doing everything by themselves, they've proved they're able to do it, and they've proved that they're able to just defeat the West, which is always known as like the higher power. Anyways, so in the Shang, the king was afraid of the ancestors and like the dead coming back and being, well, not coming back, but the dead being really upset because they feel like they treated them wrongly. So the king began to do rituals, and no priest was allowed to do the rituals, unlike in the West. But like only the king could do the rituals, and soon the mandate of heaven and Chan was added to it, which kind of put a lot more on the king's plate, because now he was like ruling government and he was doing all these rituals for people. And so this also helped. Well, this also didn't help, but it also like what happened when it went passed down to his son, and this whole entire thing of the ancestral ritual kind of brought up a giant spark of family in China and like Chinese history. Like, even from the Shang till today, family is a really big part. Like, I know personally in my family, my grandma, when she was put into a care facility, my mother decided to take her in instead of leaving her there, because it's the right thing to do. And even my mom says that we follow a lot of family, and we're very family oriented. Like, when I go to college and when my sister's gone to college, we have to be at least a 2-hour plane ride away, and we're not allowed to leave very far, which is very different from the West, because the West is very focused on their children growing up to be individuals and the children learning how to take care of themselves, while the Chinese is very focused on being able to take care of each other. And that's a lot of what the government was about. The government was really just trying to harmonize the people, and they try to do it in like different ways, like communism, Confucianism, Taoism, legalism. They were all just trying to do what was best for the people, and what was the best to bring China up as pretty much like a giant family, instead of just everyone growing up by themselves. And like, this all helps with the ideal ruler having to be with the ideal ruler living by the personalities of the sage kings, which were Yao, Shen, and Yu. And because Yao, Shen, and Yu were really like the ultimate rulers, and they had like the best character traits in them, and they really helped understand the people realize that the government is not all high power, which I feel the West is a lot like. I feel like the West is a lot like the government says this, the government does this, and it's a very legalist point of view, and it's like, so this is what we're doing. But China, like, Shun was trying to figure out who could stop the Great Flood, and the emperor kept offering him up people like, oh, what about this guy? He's the duke or whatever, and he's like really high up there in the social hierarchy. He's really like high up there. And Shun's like, no, what about that guy who's very humble, because his dad was blind, I think, and he just had like a hard life, but he was still very humble. And they really respect the people, and they really respect. I feel like the government of China really respects the people more than the Westerners ever did, and they do. And so throughout, we had many different emperors. You had many different kings, like Shi Huangdi, who can be described as a good person or a bad person. And there's also Mao, who was described as a good or bad person. But before Mao, when China was fighting within itself, the barbarians kind of just like took over the first time in Wave 2 during the period of disunity. The barbarians were able to realize what was going on in China, and they completely waited for the correct moment, and then they just came in and they like took over, and it was just like, and China like totally did not see it coming, and they had to move down to the south. And then luckily for them though, in wave 3 they built themselves back up again. But then I was surprised to hear that once again they were broken down by the same way that the barbarians had done it before the first time. Because I feel like China was kind of stupid to have made the same mistake over again, and just fight within each other and then have somebody else like take it away. And I just didn't think that was very intelligent of them. And then they had the whole communist thing go, and the Japanese came in, and then the enemy of my enemy is a friend ×2. Which just totally like describes wave 4 together. And so the Japanese came in, but then the Chinese like band together and they destroyed them. Well, they didn't destroy, but they like kicked them out. And that was the same with the warlords. And even I feel like even though the Chinese government has had like their issues and their problems throughout the waves and throughout the periods of time, they have always come back together, and they've always been able to fight and like defeat whatever has been causing the problems within them. And I think that's really interesting, because if these problems, like if the barbarians had never actually come in and like and like came in and tried to conquer them, then the Chinese would have probably never stopped fighting, or they wouldn't like I think that if the barbarians or the Japanese or the warlords, or if they had never actually come in and caused conflict within China, China would have never learned to grow back together as a whole, and they would have never been able to put themselves together as well as they have. And I think that could be one of the problems with the West, because they've never learned to put themselves back as properly as China has. And then now in the pretty much present day, like the 1900s, Mao and Deng came into rule, and even though they kind of like destroyed Confucius' views, like they took away families from each other, and they took away children from families, and kind of stopped all of that. I don't think Mao was a monster, because or I don't think Mao was a monster, and Deng was never said he was a monster, but I think that they both really just tried to do what was the best for the people, and they were really doing what rulers in the past had done, because that's all any of the rulers or the emperors had ever wanted for the people, was to do what was best. The people who were ruling China were never self-centered, or they were never like ignorant over the other countries. But even though they can be like Mao can be classified as possibly another Hitler or Stalin, they were really trying to do all these things with good intentions. Like Xi Huangdi and the Great Wall. Everything that's happened in China, I feel like the leaders that can be described as like rude, or like Mao being described as Stalin or Hitler, I don't think that's fair to say, because they really were trying to do what was best for their country. They didn't realize it would blow up so badly in their face. It just so happened it did, but it was just unfortunate for them, because they really were just trying to make China a more harmonized like country, and they really weren't just trying to tear down China and like Stalin and Hitler. They weren't being racist, and they weren't killing people for fun. And I don't think that they should have been, or Mao should have been considered part of the Hitler or Stalin times. And even though Deng didn't really stop, even though Deng had the whole thing with the Tiananmen Square happen, he did as best as he could, because he spent a month or something like that. He spent a while trying to stop the protests and stuff, and he really couldn't. So he had to start doing what the only thing he could think of was doing, which was like scaring the people off by starting to eliminate them one by one. And even though that sounds horrible, he really didn't have a choice, because the people were not listening to him, and this he felt was the only way that they would listen to him. And so therefore the Tiananmen Square massacre happened, and that was horrible. But they were just doing what was best for their people, and now we're in present day, and I guess we'll just see what happens in the next couple years, since Beijing had the Olympics and China is just going strong, and they're really like growing as a community, and they're growing as a country and as an economy, and yeah. So thank you, Mr. Burrell, for this class this semester. It was really interesting, and I really enjoyed it, and I think I said at the beginning, I really enjoyed learning more about where I came from and more about China and the East, and seeing more points of views than just the West, because I've only grown up learning from the West point of view, and I think I was probably really ignorant towards the East, even though I am Chinese, which is probably ridiculous that I was so stupid about China, and I just say thank you for telling me more about China and expanding my train of thought, if that makes sense. Thank you.